Question is that the bill be read a second time. The honourable member for Longman.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise today to speak to the National Disability Insurance Scheme Bill, the precursor to surely what will be one of the most important pieces of legislation in this place. Why is it so significant? Because a system of support for people with a disability is far more than just a simple system of support. At the core of liberal philosophy is the tenet of freedom of choice. When people with a disability are properly supported, you open up their choices and their possibilities. From the possibility of simply looking after themselves adequately to the possibility of finding greater fulfilment in life, including perhaps employment. So the long-term dividend of a fully resourced, universal national disability insurance scheme is economic as much as social. If enough people with a disability are even somewhat freed from their daily emotional, mental and physical constraints, confidence grows and potential can be realised. Their families and carers too will feel an easing in the burden of self-sacrifice. Where possible, they too are free to explore wider options in the workforce or at leisure. They feel a sense of renewal and of hope. They are free, perhaps for the first time, to accomplish something for themselves. And so, such a scheme as the NDIS, quite aside from providing an effective safety net, actually ends up paying for itself in the long term. Mr Deputy Speaker, as I have said in this place before, improving disability policy was one of my motivations for entering politics. One of my close mates suffers from spinal muscular atrophy. I worked as Pat's participation assistant at university, helping him attend classes. I have seen firsthand the numerous obstacles and roadblocks stemming from an overly bureaucratic disability system, a system focused on process instead of outcomes. As Australians, we like to believe that we are easygoing, accepting and all-inclusive. But the reality for many people living with a disability, it's like they're living in an exclusion zone, a place where there is minimal assistance and security apart from that provided by friends and family, where there is ignorance, where there are stares and whispers, and too often unkind remarks and treatment. The isolation and loneliness can be devastating. In a country such as ours, with our traditions rooted in democracy and freedoms, it is our duty to wear our social conscience like a beacon. Australia's late, great and longest-serving Prime Minister, Sir Robert Menzies, founded the modern Liberal Party on this very principle. Menzies was a stronger believer in the virtues of initiative and enterprise. But his picture of society was of a freer market system made all the richer by its obligations to the most vulnerable. For Menzies, social justice was an issue of rights before charity. The purpose of all measures of social security, he said, is not only to provide citizens with some reasonable protection against misfortune, but also to reconcile the provision within their profound independence and dignity as democratic citizens. The time has gone when social justice should even appear to take the form of social charity. This is what the National Disability Insurance Scheme is all about, ensuring that every Australian has the best opportunity of a bright future, regardless of the obstacles seemingly in their way. A well-implemented National Disability Insurance Scheme should ensure that everyone with a disability would not only have the support they need for today, but the support they need for a better, more dignified and more productive life. Mr Deputy Speaker, it would seem that members on both sides of this place agree that the need for a national disability insurance scheme is inarguable. And yet, sadly, despite this cross-party support, the politicking has persisted. The Coalition is right behind the Productivity Commission's recommendation for an NDIS and has pledged to work constructively with the government to implement them as soon as possible. This is a new deal and a new dawn for people with disabilities and their carers. Recognising this, the Productivity Commission states that the scheme will require a high level of consultation in its shaping. All Australians have a stake in the outcome, for it is not only our most vulnerable people today who will benefit. None of us know what disabilities could be visited upon ourselves or our loved ones tomorrow. But the Labor government has sought to claim the NDIS as its own, rejecting bipartisanship on a number of occasions, including the opposition leader's proposal for a cross-parliamentary party committee to be chaired by both sides of politics to oversee the scheme's implementation across what will be several terms of Parliament. The scheme is set to be launched in 5 sites across Australia in July this year. Stage 1 will impact 20,000 people with a disability and their families and carers in South Australia, the ACT, Tasmania, the Hunter Valley in New South Wales and the Barwon area of Victoria. Funding to individuals and organisations will support a broadly described range of assistance, from aids and equipment to the provision of supported accommodation or personal attendant care. Late last year, the New South Wales State Government and the Commonwealth struck an intergovernmental agreement for a full rollout of the NDIS in New South Wales beyond the launch site. However, the expansion of the NDIS will be dependent on the federal government negotiating and concluding further bilateral agreements with each jurisdiction in the Commonwealth. And here there remains much uncertainty. In my home state, the Commonwealth has yet to reach an agreement with the Queensland Government on how the NDIS will be fully funded in the long term. The Queensland Liberal National Government has submitted a proposal and is to be congratulated on its persistence in seeking a deal in spite of constant misrepresentation and politicking from the Labor Party and the Prime Minister. Indeed, Queensland is a prime example of the Prime Minister's hedging on one of the Productivity Commission's key recommendations, and that is that the federal government alone come up with the additional funding for the NDIS as a supplement to the disability funding already supplied by the states and territories. The Prime Minister has indicated in an intent, in defiance of the Productivity Commission, that the states and territories should part-sponsor the extra funding required for the NDIS. In doing this, she has also failed to recognise that late last year, for example, the state government in Queensland's contribution to disability services was already $920 million. That's compared to the federal government's assistance of just $225 million. And while the coalition supported the government's budget commitment of $1 billion over 4 years for the first stage of the NDIS, the funding once again reveals a gulf between the Productivity Commission's objectives and the Prime Minister's actions. The amount fell almost $3 billion short of what the Productivity Commission estimated would be needed in those first critical 4 years. The states and territories should not be strong-armed into picking up the balance. This federal Labor government has shortchanged the NDIS in those 4 years $3 billion. To date, there also has been little from the government in terms of how individuals will be assessed, who will be eligible, and the fine detail regarding the support and services to be delivered. The NDIS is a once-in-a-generational reform that will unfold over the life of several parliaments. We need to work together to get this right. It demands absolute cooperation between the Commonwealth, the states and politicians of all persuasions. In fact, the politics needs to be left at the door. If we do not get the implementation right, we stand to lose this opportunity not only for years, but quite possibly for generations. But still, the Prime Minister is not forthcoming on what will happen after the trials and the real NDIS begins. The Coalition, on the other hand, is committed to the Productivity Commission's target date of a full NDIS by 2018-19. Meantime, in my electorate alone, there are many examples of this Prime Minister and her federal Labor government's waste of taxpayers' money. The interest repayment on the government's debt of more than $200 billion incurred since 2007 is about $7 billion a year. That's almost enough to fund the NDIS alone. If I could choose between providing an effective safety net for our most vulnerable people and school hall rip-offs or pink bats in homes, I know which road I would take. I do not want to see this incredibly important policy, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, compromised simply because those opposite couldn't rein in their addiction to wasteful spending and failed programs. Mr Deputy Speaker, government at the end of the day is always about priorities. In difficult economic circumstances, brought on by the mismanagement of the federal Labor government, it remains important that we prioritise the NDIS and work together to make it the best that it can be. Any fair-minded Australian would agree with us. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.